There is a word in the English language for a scene of complete chaos, uproar, and confusion. The word itself is bedlam. We use it casually. A bedlam of noise. The room descended into bedlam. Almost no one who says it remembers where it comes from. It comes from a real place. A hospital. An institution that existed and still exists in London, and whose treatment of its patients was so notoriously chaotic, so cruel and so horrifying that its very name became our word for hell on earth. This is the story of Bethlem Royal Hospital, and for most of its long history, the people locked inside it endured things that would be called torture by any standard we hold today. All of it done in the name of medicine and care. This is Dark Diagnosis Files, and this is the story of Bedlam. Everything you're about to hear is drawn from documented history, from centuries of records, from a formal parliamentary inquiry that exposed the hospital's conditions, and from modern archaeology that literally unearthed its dead. This is not legend. This is the recorded history of how a society treated its most vulnerable people. Bethlem was founded all the way back in 1247, originally as a religious priory in London, the Priory of St. Mary of Bethlehem. Over time, the name Bethlehem was shortened, in the everyday speech of Londoners, to Bethlem, and then slurred further to Bedlam. By the 1300s and 1400s, it had begun taking in the sick, and increasingly those deemed insane, people with mental illnesses, epilepsy, learning disabilities, and others who had simply been cast out by a society with no place for them. In 1547, King Henry VIII granted the hospital to the City of London as an institution for the mentally ill. This makes Bethlem the first and oldest institution of its kind in all of Europe, a distinction that would come to carry a very dark weight. To understand what happened inside Bedlam, you have to understand the medical beliefs of the era, because the cruelty was not, in the minds of those inflicting it, cruelty at all. It was treatment. For centuries, physicians believed that mental illness resided in the body, not the mind, an imbalance of internal fluids or humours that had to be violently expelled to restore health. This single mistaken idea justified an entire regime of suffering. If sickness was something to be driven out of the body, then the treatments were designed to do exactly that, to purge, to shock, to drain, to exhaust. And so, patients at Bedlam were subjected to what the records describe plainly: bloodletting, opening veins to drain away excess blood, purging, forced vomiting and violent laxatives to empty the body, starvation, beatings, cold water immersion, plunging patients into ice baths to shock the system. These were not punishments handed out by rogue, sadistic staff, though there was surely sadism too. These were the prescribed medical therapies of the age. These treatments were often applied on a rigid seasonal schedule rather than any assessment of the individual patient. Records describe mass bleeding and purging carried out on inmates at set times of the year. As a matter of routine, dozens of vulnerable people bled and purged together, not because any one of them showed a specific need, but because the calendar and the theory demanded it. The individual human being had almost no place in this system. There were only bodies to be drained and emptied and shocked back toward an imagined balance. Underlying all of it was a lack of any real funding or genuine medical understanding. For long stretches of its history, Bedlam was chronically underfunded, understaffed, and overseen by people more interested in the institution's income than its inmates' welfare. At one particularly grim point, one of the physicians nominally in charge of the patients was documented as visiting rarely and taking little real interest in their care at all. Neglect in the end killed and broke as many people as the active cruelty did. A dim stone chamber, a single barred window high on the wall, an iron ring bolted into cold stone where a chain once hung. Perhaps the most infamous of Bedlam's so-called treatments was something called rotational therapy, or the rotating chair. The patient would be strapped into a chair suspended from the ceiling by ropes, and then it would be spun, rotated, sometimes at speeds reported to reach as high as 100 rotations per minute, for extended periods. The intended medical purpose was, once again, to induce violent vomiting that favoured purgative and to physically shake the madness loose. The actual effect was terror, disorientation, and agonizing vertigo. The patient spun until they were sick and semi-conscious. There is a grim, almost unbelievable footnote to this. The extreme vertigo deliberately inflicted on these patients was, centuries later, of genuine scientific interest. The reactions recorded actually contributed in some small way to later understanding of vertigo and the inner ear. Their suffering, inflicted for no valid reason, was not even entirely wasted by history, but that does nothing to lessen what was done to them in those chairs. This was not a torture chamber run by people who understood themselves as torturers. It was a hospital, and now we come to the detail that, more than any other, defines the horror of Bedlam, and that is almost impossible to comprehend by modern standards. For much of the 17th and 18th centuries, Bethlem Hospital was open to the public, not as a place of healing, as entertainment. Members of the public could pay a small fee to enter the hospital and walk its galleries, viewing the inmates as a spectacle, a human zoo. The mentally ill, at their most vulnerable and distressed, were put on display for the amusement and morbid curiosity of paying visitors. At the height of this practice, Bedlam was one of the most popular tourist attractions in all of London. Its popularity was said to rival that of St. Paul's Cathedral. People brought their friends. They laughed at the patients, provoked them, jeered at their distress. During these visits, some patients were reportedly chained to the walls so they couldn't harm the gawking visitors, restrained specifically so they could be safely stared at. The institution, for its part, is thought to have tolerated and even encouraged the practice in part because it generated income. The entry fees helped fund a chronically under-resourced hospital, so the exploitation was not incidental. It was, in a sense, part of the business model. The suffering of the patients was quite literally monetized, turned into a revenue stream, their worst moments sold as a day out. Imagine being at the lowest, most frightening point of your life, confined, ill, terrified, and having strangers file past your cell, pointing and laughing, having paid for the privilege. That was the everyday reality of Bedlam for generations, and it shaped how an entire society came to view mental illness. The conditions themselves, beyond the deliberate treatments, were squalid. Historical inspections describe filth, cramped and freezing cells, an open drain running through parts of the building, patients left in their own waste, chained and neglected. When a grand new Bedlam building was constructed at Moorfields in 1676, an opulent, palatial-looking structure designed by an associate of Christopher Wren, the beautiful facade hid the same rot within. The building was impressive on the outside and rotting on the inside, a fitting metaphor for the entire institution. So how did this finally begin to change? The turning point came in the early 19th century, and it came because of one particular scandal. In 1814 and 1815, reformers gained access to Bedlam, and what they documented shocked even a public accustomed to hard conditions. The most infamous single case was that of a patient named James Norris, also recorded as William Norris. He had been confined in a horrifying custom-built iron harness that pinned his arms to his sides and chained him to a post, restricting his movement for years. He had reportedly been kept restrained in this apparatus for over a decade, more than 10 years bound in iron, barely able to move. When reformers found and publicized his condition, illustrated in a widely circulated engraving, it caused public outrage. It put a single human face on an abstract horror. Norris died not long after he was finally freed from the harness, his health broken by the years of confinement. But the engraving of his suffering outlived him and helped force change. That outrage fed directly into a formal government investigation. In 1815, the British House of Commons Select Committee began examining the conditions in madhouses and asylums across the country, with Bethlem a central focus. The inquiry laid bare the systematic neglect, the brutal restraints, the squalor, and the sheer inhumanity of how patients were treated. It was a watershed moment. The exposure of Bedlam and institutions like it fed a growing reform movement, a slow, difficult shift toward what was called moral treatment, the radical idea that the mentally ill should be treated with kindness, dignity, and humane care rather than chains and purges. It would take many more decades. There is one final chapter to Bedlam's horror, and it stayed hidden underground for centuries, until remarkably, it was uncovered in our own time. Across its long history, countless patients died within Bethlem's walls, many of them poor, unclaimed, and forgotten. They were buried in a burial ground associated with the hospital, thousands upon thousands of people, interred in what became a dense, layered mass of graves over the centuries. That burial ground was lost to memory beneath the modern city of London. And then, in the 2010s, during the massive Crossrail railway construction project, excavators digging beneath the city broke into it, Archaeologists were brought in, and they uncovered the remains of thousands of individuals, some estimates of the total interred across the site's history running into the tens of thousands, buried in a space of astonishing density. Many were victims of plague, many others were the forgotten dead of Bedlam. Here is what may be the strangest part of the entire story. Bethlem Royal Hospital still exists today. It never closed. It moved locations over the centuries, and it is now a modern psychiatric hospital operating within Britain's National Health Service, a place of genuine, compassionate mental health care. The institution that gave us the word for chaos and cruelty transformed, across nearly 8 centuries, into something its early patients could never have imagined, a place that actually tries to heal. That arc, from the rotating chair and the paying spectators to modern, humane psychiatric medicine. But we should never let the comfort of that progress erase what came before. For most of its history, Bedlam was a place where suffering was inflicted as medicine, where the vulnerable were chained for public amusement, and where thousands died and were forgotten. It earned its terrible name. And the word we still use so casually today is a small, permanent monument to everyone who suffered inside those walls. If forgotten histories like this one matter to you, please take a moment to subscribe to Dark Diagnosis Files. We uncover the real, documented darkness in the history of medicine. Your subscription is what keeps this channel investigating them. This has been a real, documented, historical account. Every detail is sourced from confirmed historical records, parliamentary inquiries, and archaeological findings. Dark Diagnosis Files investigates the horror that happens around hospitals and medicine. New cases every Sunday, Tuesday, and Friday. Real, documented, told with the gravity they deserve. Every time you hear the word Bedlam, remember where it came from, and remember the thousands who are still buried beneath the city that made their suffering into a word.